Hey everyone, what's going on? This video is just a follow-up video proving my point yet again that the things that I am talking about in regards to our media being scripted and our sports leagues being scripted and our told history all being scripted by ancient knowledge. This is what this video is going to be about. And I'm not going to go into super detail right now. But recently, I have been making several videos talking about how the Nebraska Cornhuskers are important to what is going on with the NFL season and also the Donald Trump building the wall, because the Nebraska Cornhuskers play in Lincoln, Nebraska, and their stadium is called Memorial Stadium, but they refer to it as the Sea of Red. And Moses parted the Red Sea, and Moses brought in the age of Aries, which is a ram. And there's much, much more that goes along with this. I know it sounds crazy, but I explained it a lot better in these other videos that I'm going to leave in a link in the description. But, I talked about all of this Nebraska Cornhusker stuff. Then in the NFL championship games, Greg Zuerlein of the Rams made the winning field goal to send the Rams to the Super Bowl, and Rex Burkhead, the former Nebraska Cornhusker who played for the Patriots, scored the winning touchdown to send the Patriots into the Super Bowl. The ref in that game was even Clete Blakeman, who's from Lincoln, Nebraska. Greg Zuerlein, he's from Lincoln, Nebraska. I don't know if maybe I said he played for the Nebraska Cornhuskers, but he's from Lincoln, Nebraska. And there's all these other connections, such as the Rams they played the Patriots in the Super Bowl just after 9/11. And if you recall, on 9/11, George Bush, he went to Nebraska, and Dick Cheney, his vice president, is from Lincoln, Nebraska. There's a lot of stuff that is going on with all of that is going on. So check out the links in the description. But just yesterday, the day after the Super Bowl, a story we got in sports was that the quarterback's coach of the Rams is already leaving the Rams, and he is going to be the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. His name just so happens to be Zach Taylor, a guy who played for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And the reason he's going to the Cincinnati Bengals is because his name, Zach Taylor, is like the president named Zach Taylor, who, after he had won the Battle of Buena Vista that was in the Mexican-American War, and think about that in regards to the wall symbolism, he got inducted into this thing called the Society of the Cincinnati. And think about it. Now this guy, Zach Taylor, a former Nebraska Cornhusker, he's going to the Cincinnati Bengals. So, anyway, today I get home from work and I go to CNN, and one of the main stories on the CNN headlines is a story about Jerry Sandusky being resentenced because, whatever, they denied his request for a retrial. And if you go back to 2015, I have been talking about how Jerry Sandusky is important to the Nebraska Cornhuskers since 2015. The first team that Penn State played after the Jerry Sandusky molestation thing, they played the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and they made it a big old deal. They thought that it was going to be this crazy thing, and then, it really wasn't that crazy of a game. People, they even knelt in the middle of the field and prayed and whatnot. And oddly enough, the lead rusher of that game was Rex Burkhead for the Nebraska Cornhuskers, who went on to beat Penn State. Anyway, a big thing that I talked about in 2015 was how just before the season of the NFL, or of the whatever, or of football, on September 1st, we got the death of this guy, Dean Jones, who is the actor in the movie Herbie the Love Bug. Herbie. And the Nebraska Cornhuskers had 3 mainstream media articles going on at that same time. There was one about their new coach, Mike Riley, who is synced up to the Teen Wolf stuff, but Mike Riley, there was some type of rape case going on with Oregon State, and they're the Beavers, and then it was all about rape. And Penn State plays in Beaver Stadium. But there was also a story about, the Nebraska PA announcer got fired, and they hired another guy. And then he got fired after one day because he wrote some bad stuff on Facebook. And then they hired another PA announcer. And just notice in this article about Jerry Sandusky how they highlight this. So this is something I pointed out way back when. Pennsylvania, the abbreviation is PA, the PA announcer, right? And look how they write it in this article. PA court orders. They don't write Pennsylvania, they write PA because they want you to see this. Like I'm telling you, it's exactly what I was talking about. And there was also a story around that same time of this Dean Jones guy dying, of Lawrence Phillips, the former Nebraska Cornhusker, who might have killed his cellmate in prison, but they weren't sure at the time or whatever. And then, in January later that year, Lawrence Phillips ended up hanging himself in prison, supposedly. Anyway, then when we got the death of this guy from Herbie the Love Bug, I was like, this has to be connected to the Nebraska Cornhuskers because Nebraska's mascot just so happens to be Herbie Husker. And a bunch of other things led me to look into the movie Tommy Boy, because in the beginning of the movie, he, instead of writing John Hancock, he writes Herbie Hancock. And that's how he graduates from the Jesuit University, Marquette and whatnot. But in that film, in the very beginning, he drops his American history book, and it has the number 239 written on it. And 2015 just so happened to be the 239th year of the United States. Pope Francis went to the White House on the date of 23/9, and the word Pope in Gematria equals 52, which is the 52nd prime is 239. There was a lot of stuff going on with this number. We were talking about San Francisco a whole lot and the Golden Gate Bridge, and in Gematria, Golden Gate equals 239. So does Torah, and the Jews believe that the Messiah is going to return through the Golden Gate. We also, the day that Pope Francis left on the Jesuit anniversary, he left from Philadelphia, and we got that fourth blood moon of the Tetrad on that day. And it also began at 8:11 p.m. on the East Coast, which is interesting considering a big day that we have been following for 2019 is August 11th, because that's the day the Jewish whatever you call it, Remembrance Day of the destruction of the two temples is coming up. And a lot of times, big events happen around this date, and it just so happens to be on August 10th and 11th this year. Anyway, there's a few other interesting things about the movie Tommy Boy. His name's Tommy Callahan, and if you remember in Nebraska football coaching history, they also had a coach named Bill Callahan, who's now the coach of the Washington Redskins. And the movie's also set in the town of Sandusky, Ohio, right? Sandusky, Ohio. The Nebraska Cornhuskers were the first team to play Penn State after the whole Jerry Sandusky stuff. So, I just wanted to make a point that, I'm talking about the Nebraska Cornhusker stuff. I don't always know who's going to win the game, but the things that I am talking about, they continually show up in the mainstream media just after I talk about them, and it never fails. There's some more Nebraska stuff. A big thing that I talked about with Nebraska was in 2015, in the NBA All-Star Week, it fell over this festival of Lupercalia, which is where they celebrate and sacrifice a wolf. It's from February 13th to the 15th. And during that NBA All-Star Week, we had a teen wolf, Andrew Wiggins, win the Rising Star Challenge MVP. The next night, the slam dunk contest was won by Zach LaVine, who was also a Minnesota teen wolf. He was a teenager and a Minnesota Timberwolf. And then Russell Westbrook won the NBA All-Star MVP. And Westbrook went to UCLA, and Zach LaVine went to UCLA, and Andrew Wiggins was traded for Kevin Love, right? And Valentine's Day falls over this festival, right? Kevin Love went to UCLA. And I wondered if there was something connected to a wolf, something to do with wolf. And, I was like, I wonder if the movie Teen Wolf has something in it. And if you go watch that movie, all throughout the background is Nebraska Cornhusker stuff, a license plate, a calendar, and it really makes absolutely no sense because there's palm trees in the movie, and the movie's not set there, it's not filmed there, but they have Nebraska Cornhusker stuff all throughout the background of the movie. And when he turns into the wolf, he joins the school play about the Civil War. Think about Abraham Lincoln, Nebraska, the Civil War. The mascot in that movie is the beaver, and if you look it up, it says it's based off of the Oregon State Beaver. And then in 2015, Nebraska got the new coach, or it was at the end of 2014, but he never coached until 2015 season, but they got Mike Riley, who was the former coach of the Oregon State Beavers. What are the odds of that, right? So, I don't know. There's something very symbolic to the Lupercalia that is coming up this year, I believe, on February 13th through the 15th. And part of the reason why is because when you look up Nebraska, the university, it was actually established on February 15th, and this year will be the 150th anniversary. In gematria, the practice of coding numbers into words, Lincoln, Nebraska equals 150. And the reason it's important, February 15th is the last day of Lupercalia, this wolf festival. And also, that is the same day that Chris Farley was born. Chris Farley here. Chris Farley, born on February 15th, the last day of Lupercalia. I mean, there's a narrative that's connected to Chicago with it, too, so I don't know. It could be something to do with Chicago, but I just want to point this out. And in the halftime show of the Super Bowl, we had Maroon 5. And the reason Maroon 5, they got big after they had another guitarist join the band, and his name was something Valentine. Let's find it really quick. Can't think of the guy's name. We'll type in Maroon 5. James Valentine. The guy from Lincoln, Nebraska, joined the band, and then he knew John Mayer, so they got to go on tour with John Mayer, and then they got pretty big after that, right? His name's James Valentine. And remember, Valentine's Day falls over this wolf festival, and the University of Nebraska was established during this wolf festival 150 years ago. And I also, earlier in 2018, we got these stories about earthquakes in Nebraska, just small earthquakes in Nebraska, and on the map they showed us Valentine, Nebraska, even though the earthquakes weren't next to Valentine, Nebraska. So let me just type it out really quick. We had 4 earthquakes in Nebraska, and on the map here, they have North Platte, Valentine, and then Omaha. It just seemed really weird when I was watching it on the news. Like, they showed Valentine, some smaller town. And when you look up this town, you find out that the TV show Full House, the character Rebecca Donaldson, who's Uncle Jesse's wife, on the show, she's from Valentine, Nebraska. And think about how that show's set in San Francisco. They even have an episode about the Loma Prieta earthquake, and that happened at the 1989 World Series. And this year on August 11th, the game in San Francisco is a dedication to the 1989 Giants who were in that earthquake World Series. But there's a lot of stuff with the number 52 here. The Loma Prieta earthquake happened 52 days before that episode came out, and Fuller House equals 52, which they brought back, which there's a lot to re-explain, but so I'm not going to re-explain it all, but a lot to do with the number 52. That's why Jerry Sandusky was charged with 52 counts of molestation. That's why Joe Paterno equals 52 in gematria. And he died at the age of 85 because Jerry Sandusky's full name equals 85. But Cornhuskers equal 52. Joe Paterno died on 122. And the 122nd day just so happens to be 5-2. And if you write out San Francisco, it equals 122. So, I pointed out a whole bunch of stuff. I want to make a short video because I want to make one other video about John Wall tearing his Achilles today. The story we got, and it's all about the wall symbolism. I mean, John Wall, the player from the Washington Wizards, think about it. Donald Trump in Washington, he wants to build the wall. And he found out that he had a half tear in his Achilles on the same day that Donald Trump addressed the nation about building the friggin' wall, dude. Like, what are the odds of that? Actually, though, reading here, I want to mention this point in this because when you look up Jerry Sandusky, and I have an old video on it, they're not even that informative videos, but they sort of are. It's more about the storyline than the numbers. But Jerry Sandusky, he created the Second Mile program, and that's where he was molesting some of these boys, supposedly. And when George H.W. Bush gave his 1,000 Points of Light speech, he praised Jerry Sandusky's Second Mile thing. And that phrase, 1,000 Points of Light, it actually comes from the author C.S. Lewis in one of his books or something called The Magician's Nephew. And C.S. Lewis just so happened to die the same day as Aldous Huxley, the guy who has A Brave New World. And that was also the same day that JFK died. And there's a big narrative with the Pope and Donald Trump and JFK dying in connection to the... JFK died just after meeting the Pope. He died 144 days after meeting the Pope in 63. Donald Trump met Pope Francis on the 144th day of the year, 4 months and 4 days after he became the president. And if you write out 44, it equals 144 and a whole bunch. I'll leave a link in the description to why it's all important. But just want to point out that C.S. Lewis was the guy who originally did that. He died the same day as JFK. And when Donald Trump announced he was going to be the president, and they had that whole thing that they mocked us with about him coming down the elevator with the Simpsons, in real life, when he came down that elevator, the song that was playing in the background was Keep On Rockin' in the Free World by Neil Young. And the reason that's interesting is because in that song, he says, we have 1,000 points of lights for the homeless man, right? So that lyric, or that phrase, is in that Neil Young song when Donald Trump announced that he was going to be running for the president. And Neil Young is really important to this Native American theme that I was talking about. That's why Mike Pence came from Indiana, the land of the Indian. And a few years back, there was a guy wearing the Freemason hat at the Nebraska Cornhusker and Indiana game, I believe it was. And they made it clear as day. But Neil Young also has that song called Ohio. And that song is about the Kent State shooting, right? And the only reason I think that's important is because, oh, what's the guy's name? Who just won the MVP of the Super Bowl? Can't think of his name. Hold on. It was Julian Edelman, and look what college he went to. He went to Kent State, so just makes me think about that, And Donald Trump had all these connections to Cleveland, Cleveland that is in Ohio. Then we get this Cincinnati guy, the Nebraska guy. He's going to be the coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. And, there's even this connection to the Omaha Native American people who originally were called the Mahas, and they came from the area of Ohio. So it's also interesting that this story came on the same day of Donald Trump's State of the Union address. And when Lawrence Phillips died, he died the same day that Obama gave his State of the Union on January 12th, and then the next day Lawrence Phillips died, and Obama went to Omaha, Nebraska, and gave a speech at Baxter Arena, And that college is part of the University of Nebraska Lincoln system and whatnot. So then after Obama left there, he went to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and he gave a speech at McKinley High School. And in history, McKinley was one of the assassinated presidents. He's the 25th president. And that's important to Donald Trump's State of the Union address today because it was on 2-5 and Trump equals 25 and Pence equals 25. That's why, Nancy Pelosi, her name equals 52, and she's the 52nd Speaker of the House, the reflection of 25. That's even why we got the stupid story of the women wearing white tonight, because the word women in gematria equals 25, and the word white equals 25 in gematria. And all this comes on 2-5. Also, in regards to the 1,000 points of lights thing, Donald Trump actually criticized that in 2018. He said, what does that even mean, All I know is make America great again and whatnot. And there was an article about how Donald Trump criticized the 1,000 points of lights thing, and then George H.W. Bush dies. So it's all synced up to 9/11, and the Patriots and the Rams are in the Super Bowl again, just like how they were just after 9/11. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Like I said, there's a big narrative. I want to think a little bit more on it because I mean there might, I don't know, there's I guarantee there's something I'm missing with all of it, but what are the odds? The day after the Super Bowl, we get a story about a former Nebraska Cornhusker. Then we get this story about Jerry Sandusky, who I mentioned constantly in 2015, how he was connected to the Nebraska Cornhuskers and this big narrative. So definitely going to be paying attention. Rebecca Donaldson, right? Think about that. And Full House, Rebecca Donaldson. She's from Valentine, Nebraska. Lupercalia is definitely going to be a very symbolic year, I believe, this year. So we'll see what kind of stories we get. I don't know if we're going to get some type of shooting or whatever else. I don't know. Just try to figure this puzzle out. So maybe someone can point me into, help me figure this out. So have a good one. Peace.